This is Good Morning Transfers. We've got so much to discuss today. We'll tell you what's coming up in a moment, but we want to hear from you, and there are plenty of ways to get involved.
Coming up on today's show, we'll bring you right up to date with the tug-of-war between two London rivals over Gedson Fernandes.
Yep, so much more to come this morning, Manchester United fans. We want to hear from you. We'll have news from your club and details on who Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is looking to sign in just a moment.
Newcastle fans, it's time we assess your options in the market. We know Steve Bruce is keen to strengthen that front line, and we have the latest news for you.
And we'll tell you all about the forgotten men of the Premier League. I'm not going to name them now, because you'll probably forget them. Find out who they are later this hour.
Yeah, remember, you can download the latest Transfer Talk podcast right now, available on iTunes, Spreaker and the Sky Sports website. Right, we've been talking about this man since the first show of this window. It's Gedson Fernandes. The story's taken a few twists. We reported yesterday the next 72 hours would be crucial, and that has very much proved to be the case. In fact, the next 24 hours were crucial. Mark, tell us what happened at about 7 p.m. last night.
Yeah, it was about 6:55 on Sky Sports News. We brought you the information that, once again, the ongoing saga of Gedson Fernandes had twisted in yet another direction. And it was quite an intriguing direction as well, because someone else joined the party, and it's a big player. It was Chelsea. We brought you the news last night that around 6:55 that they made an offer for the Benfica midfielder Gedson Fernandes. The offer is thought to be an 18-month loan deal with an obligation to buy for £55 million, providing he played a certain amount of games during that loan spell. Obviously, West Ham's initial offer was an 18-month loan with an obligation to buy for £33 million. Are you keeping up with this one?
Yes, just.
But that was a different percentage of games that he had to play for West Ham, which would then trigger the obligation to buy. That was what was happening last night, but this keeps moving and changing directions.
Yeah, West Ham's obligation was fewer games, wasn't it, to Chelsea? But that's the thing, because that was at 7 p.m, wasn't it, Mark? But I think it was around about 11 p.m, James. It was changed.
It was late. It was certainly past my bedtime when we had news that West Ham United actually revised their offer for the midfielder, and Benfica are believed to be certainly leaning towards accepting this offer, which is quite a big surprise, I think, considering Chelsea have put themselves into the hat. The club feel Fernandes, though, is more likely to maintain his value because he's going to get more opportunities to play at the London Stadium. Benfica are actually due to have a board meeting today to discuss the final conditions of the deal.
James, it's your Transfer Talk debut, and that was a very, very good start.
Welcome.
Well
Is that good?
Okay.
It was all right.
Early night.
Well, welcome to the team.
It's hot in here, right?
So a lot's been happening with this Gedson Fernandes deal ever since day one, like we said. But Mark, I'm going to go back to you here because you talked about the deal and you talked about the figures. I think you said that Chelsea's obligation to buy would be £55 million, but West Ham's would be £33 million. So I can tell that everyone at home now is thinking, well, why would Chelsea's final fee, why would they bid an extra £22 million?
Quite simply, Gedson Fernandes could be a world-class player. Right now, he is very raw, he's young, he's not got Premier League experience, he's not got a lot of experience at Benfica. But Chelsea are gambling that if they bring him in now, he hits the ground running, has an impact, then paying £55 million for a player that could be absolutely world-class would be a snip. Whereas West Ham are thinking, we're going to have to do a bit of work here. He's probably going to play a few more games because obviously the Chelsea side are a lot stronger and it's going to be more difficult for him to get in. So it all depends on the way they structure deals. Obviously, every single deal that's done in the transfer window for every single player is structured differently. And the payments are always staggered generally over 6 months to 6 years. It just depends how each club values the player as to how they stagger things. And that's just what's happened here. Chelsea are just doing things slightly differently, perhaps giving a bigger incentive to Benfica for the long term. But actually, sometimes clubs just want money in the bank now.
I think it's quite clever from Chelsea, actually, because the obligation for £55 million if he plays at least 50% of his games, if he's not developing as they'd like, and of course he plays fewer than 50% of the games, and he goes back and moves to another club possibly. But JD, yeah, it's obvious from the West Ham point of view they clearly want him, all right, because they came back in for him last night. Now, can you make an argument for the player choosing West Ham over Chelsea?
Yeah, of course you can. And I think it harks back to exactly what Mark was just talking about. It's game time. at 20 years old, you want to be developing as a young player. And a lot of the reason that's what we're understanding for his uncomfortableness right now in the Benfica setup is the lack of game time. So he would look at both West Ham and Chelsea, and obviously naturally Chelsea is probably going to be the more attractive option. But as a 20-year-old who wants to control his career, who wants to play, as we talked about his ambition actually wanting to come to England, he's got to assess game time. And looking at that West Ham midfield right now, they'd be slightly short of options as well. You think about really only Mark Noble and Declan Rice are the real only two designated centre midfielders that we can think of. Obviously, you still have Jack Wilshere there, who's struggling for fitness, and Carlos Sanchez, who we spoke about, who really can't get into the team at all. So in terms of opportunity, West Ham would be a very, very attractive prospect. And also shout out to Michael Bridge, who spoke about those relationships that he has with those young players in the under-23s as well.
Didn't he? He's got some friends in the under-23s, and we've been saying how his mother lives in London, when with Chelsea and West Ham. That doesn't matter in that sense. Of course, in terms of the other central midfielders, Lanzini and Fornals are a little bit, they play a little bit further forward. Emma, so when I said that they play further forward, where does Fernandes play? What do we know about him for those who missed Friday's show?
Well, what JD touched on there is where he can fit in now, but this player is 22 years old. He's a very promising young talent, and West Ham's thoughts here are really where he's going to fit in over the next 5 years and beyond. I mean, he comes from an incredible youth setup at Benfica. You mentioned the names of Bernardo Silva, who's come from there, João Felix, João Cancelo, Edison, another one at Manchester City. They have an incredible sort of reputation of bringing this young talent through. So it's really kind of looking ahead with this young player. And in Portugal, they actually say they compare him to Paul Pogba because of the way he plays, his build, his presence in midfield. So that's kind of, I mean, that's telling. That can tell you what he can bring to the team, but definitely one to the future, for the future. And also, just to mention as well, you said he fell out of favour at Benfica because he hasn't played a lot. He started for Benfica on Saturday, but hadn't actually played since November before that. It's just worth mentioning that there's no conflict there. He hasn't fallen out with anyone. It's purely that they prefer other players in front of him.
Yeah, keep your tweets coming in, by the way, hashtag transfer talk. There's one here from Jason Waters, who's a West Ham fan. Well, I don't know if he's a West Ham fan, actually, but this is his view on this. He says, Fernandes wants to join West Ham because he'll get more playing time. Have they not seen how bad the Manchester United midfield is? I think he's talking about choosing Fernandes, West Ham over Manchester United. But at the moment, it's between West Ham and Chelsea. He says he'd walk into the midfield and he'd get as many games as Daniel James has, so saying Daniel James getting into that Manchester United side and really developing as a player. So keep those coming in. A lot of tweets actually are about Manchester United. So Emma, I think you better get over the Sky Pad and talk about them, please.
I think I had. Right, follow me, guys. So every day here we've been talking about what Premier League clubs need in this January transfer window. So today we're looking at Manchester United, and we've got to be realistic here, Manchester United fans. I'm sorry, we can only put two positions on this board, the two priority areas. Their lack of a creative mind in the final third seems to have held them back more than anything else this season, really. So a creative midfielder is on the wish list. Injuries certainly haven't helped them, have they? Scott McTominay is ruled out for a couple of months with a knee injury, while Paul Pogba will now be sidelined for some time as well after having surgery on his ankle. And we reported earlier this week the club are interested in Leicester's James Maddison, but Brendan Rodgers says he will be at Leicester in January and beyond. Right, now other than that, a proven goalscorer is also on the wish list after Romelu Lukaku was sold to Inter Milan in the summer, but they have already missed out on their leading forward target in Erling Haaland. So he, of course, opted to join Borussia Dortmund from Red Bull Salzburg instead. So that's the wish list, guys.
Yeah, and in terms of that wish list there, creative midfielder, Mark, can you see why Manchester United would want one?
Well, I think every single club in the Premier League, every single team in the EFL, every single side playing Sunday League football, they want someone who can play through the middle. Yes. And of course, when you look at the Manchester United great sides over the last sort of 25 years, they've always had someone through the heart that can dictate the tempo of the game, who can control the way they play, can pop the ball around, and can, of course, open up defences. And that's what Manchester United need. That's what anyone needs. I was looking at some of the players. You go back to the first Premier League title, 92-93. Paul Ince was in the middle of the park. Great player back in the day. That's a name. And then you go back to the likes of, Roy Keane, who wasn't creative, but he could certainly play. Then you had someone called Paul Scholes, Nicky Butt, and then latterly someone called Michael Carrick. So it's a key part of Manchester United's philosophy. Whoever they have in the middle of the park, they've got to run the show, and that's why it's crucial Ollie gets someone in that mould as soon as possible.
Well, James, is Ajax's Donny van der Beek in that mode? Because according to ESPN's Mark Obden, he is of interest to Manchester United.
I think he fits perfectly in that mould, to be honest with you. For somebody who's 22 years old, we were talking about Gedson Fernandes earlier. This is a 22-year-old who's been playing for 4 or 5 seasons, Champions League experience, played in the semi-final, of course, for Ajax in their fantastic campaign last season. He's a real stalwart in that Ajax side. I think he could offer this great experience at such a young age. He's got the energy. He's a very robust central midfielder, so he likes getting forward. He likes to be creative. He scored 8 goals already this season, and we're only into January. And Ajax perspective, they're out of the Champions League now. So there's a little bit more, maybe a bit of a worry within Ajax about the amount of money that they're actually getting. Now, they've got a player that's probably valued quite high, so it could be an opportunity for other clubs to kind of come in under the radar and maybe steal one of their biggest starlets.
You're pushing for Ajax to sell him another Ajax to sell another star that you're doing. You're just pushing out all of Ajax's stars over the last 18 months.
That's what Ajax are so good at. They really are. But
they're good at producing top young players, James, aren't they? Absolutely.
They are. And I think, you know, Man United, we've spoke so much about them, certainly before this show. We've spoken a lot about how they need a little bit more in their side. You know, we saw a great performance against Manchester City where they played on the counter-attack. That's all well and good. But when they're playing against teams who are going to sit back a little bit more, that's where they're coming up stuck, and they need a bit more creativity and a bit more power from the middle of the park.
Yeah, a couple of tweets have come in right now. One of them suggesting that Manchester United should consider moves for Jack Grealish or Donny van der Beek. So we've just been talking about Van der Beek anyway. And someone else has tweeted, a Manchester United fan, saying that they need, again, Jack Grealish as well. So his name is cropping up as well for Manchester United. So it looks like the fans very much keen on the creative midfielder, as Emma was just saying. But also, Emma mentioned a striker, someone here asking about Edinson Cavani as well. But in terms of a striker, JD, Martial plays there, Rashford plays there, Greenwood plays there, but they all play out wide as well. Do they need someone who is just an out-and-out striker?
I just think it's so interesting you look at this Man United squad now, because I think about some of those historic teams that you speak about. Think about back to the 99-2000 team, where there was 4 designated quality strikers within that team. You had York, Cole, Sheringham and Solskjaer. And then you think about the next revolution they had when they had Tevez, Ronaldo, Rooney and even Berbatov. They've always had more than one option. So if one striker wasn't in form or one striker wasn't working out that day, it just didn't seem like Man United were never going to score. And that's not putting pressure on these young players, because it's not really their fault. They're still developing their game. And we've seen the development, especially with Mason Greenwood this year. But Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has been embedded in that Man United system for so long now, and will understand that history. And surely, especially losing a player like Lukaku, you must think it's a priority to bring in another goal scorer to add, because every single one of those teams that I just mentioned have had at least 4 viable goal scoring options.
It's the way football has evolved over the course of the last few years, isn't it? Whereas back in the day, Sir Alex, like you say, and JD makes a great point there, it's quite interesting to think about it, 4 top quality strikers.
Always.
Now, because sides play 1 up front and 2 wide men, and they go 4-3-3 or something like that, suddenly there's only 1 striker on the pitch and they're relying on goals from the 2 wide men. So it's quite interesting, the dynamic and how things have changed.
Yeah, definitely. There are some more tweets coming in. When we were talking about James Maddison there, Christopher says, as a Leicester fan, it gets rather annoying you constantly talking about selling our Leicester players, even when Brendan Rodgers has come out and said no one is for sale.
Should we let him know our producers are Leicester fans?
Every single time we mention James Maddison, we say this deal is very, very, very unlikely. And in fact, we do not expect it to happen. So I'm afraid, Christopher, you've maybe not been listening as well as you should have.
Someone's getting a tweet.
Yeah, absolutely. This on now. In terms of the recruitment strategy, Emma, in the summer, it definitely changed under Solskjaer.
Yeah,
didn't it?
absolutely.
So.
I think one thing is Manchester United still don't have a director of football, which is something that has been talked about for a long time now and still hasn't happened. And like you said, things have changed. Recruitment, I suppose the strategy since Sir Alex Ferguson has left the club has all been about bringing in big names. It's been quite reactive, really. You look at Angel Di Maria, a player brought in for £60 million from Real Madrid. Everyone's so excited. Didn't work out. Radamel Falcao, Manchester United blew Manchester City out of the water to bring this player in on loan and kind of bow down to his needs. Didn't work out. Bastian Schweinsteiger, Alexis Sanchez, say no more. These players didn't work out. And now, under Solskjaer, it seems like, you know, there's less of a desire to bring in these big names and more about players who fit the profile of this Manchester United identity moving forward now.
And you have to give Solskjaer credit for that, because he would have been embedded in that system. He would have seen youth players come through and understand that that is ingrained in Manchester United's history. So him being brave and saying, look, we want to stick with Greenwood, even though they probably do need an experienced striker in there to help those young strikers out, is credit to him as well. He's probably putting his own job on the line sometimes when he does that.
Yeah, one more tweet here. It's from DJ Shawcross. In terms of the creative midfielder, he says that they should go for either Bruno Fernandes, who we talked a lot about in the summer, Kai Havertz, Jack Grealish again, Christian Eriksen and Van der Beek, who we have just been talking about. OK, right, time for State of Play then, and that's with Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. There we go. Crystal Palace are in talks with Everton over a loan move for Cenk Tosun. Brighton, Crystal Palace and Southampton are all interested in signing Kyle Walker-Peters on loan from Tottenham this month as well. Steven Nzonzi is looking for his way out of a loan deal with Galatasaray after he was suspended indefinitely by the Turkish club. And finally, Preston North End have completed the signing of winger Scott Sinclair on a 2.5-year deal for an undisclosed fee.
Still to come on Good Morning Transfers, Jose Mourinho has a midfield crisis on his hands. Will he look to add this month? We'll talk about that next. go on to Tottenham now, because we were originally told that it would be a quiet January transfer window for them, but that may have changed, with good reason. They're now considering entering the market for a new midfielder on loan due to their ongoing injury crisis. So, Emma, what's the latest?
Yeah, well, it was confirmed earlier this week that Moussa Sissoko faces 3 months out with a knee problem. And as we already know, their record summer signing Tanguy Ndombele and Eric Dyer have also struggled for fitness as of late. So not good news. Victor Wanyama has found his first team minutes really limited, hasn't he, after coming close to leaving in the summer. And that leaves just Harry Winks as the only fit recognised central midfielder. And head coach Jose Mourinho has mostly fielded 2 defensive midfielders.
Yeah, so with that in mind, JD, is this an obvious area for them to strengthen?
Yes and no. I think with the criticism that was faced with Mourinho, and I loved his response in one of his early press conferences talking about those players that he apparently hasn't developed, those young players. I think it's an opportunity for Oliver Skipp. I think coming through that Tottenham academy and impressing, especially under the last 10 years of Maurizio Pochettino, he kind of proved that he could play at this level. He kind of proved that he has that capability and has more than one facet to sort of his game. So this is an opportunity for him, but does he kind of fit a similar mould to Harry Winks, and does he have that sort of size and shape that Mourinho has historically loved in his midfield? And I love the point that Emma kind of made, because he has historically always got big sort of holding midfielders in there, and neither Winks nor Oliver Skipp is of an extremely commanding presence. So it would maybe make you think, make you think that he does have to dip into the market and kind of bring in maybe a player on a short-term loan deal.
Are there any other options, James?
I think you made a great point about Oliver Skipp. We were talking about him potentially going out on loan. I think the Sissoko injuries completely changed their mind. I think you're right. I think it's time he does get an opportunity. But I'll look at the commitment, as Jose puts it, of certain midfielder Christian Eriksen. Now, if he is committed, as Mourinho, again, keeps reiterating, then I'd be tempted to drop him into the middle. Now, against physical sides, he might struggle a little bit, but against less so physical sides, I think Tottenham will need him to get on the ball. Now, they've been dispossessed. The second most in the Premier League, Spurs. Now, you don't expect that from a Spurs side who usually like to build through the midfield and through the centre of the park. So dropping Christian Eriksen deeper, I'd like to see more game time for Lo Celso further up the field as well.
So you think that Eriksen could sit deeper to solve that problem? But then what if Victor Wanyama gets a chance and plays really well?
Get him, Tom.
Then great for Tottenham fans. Yeah. Then it's win-win for Tottenham. I think it's about time Victor Wanyama steps up, to be honest with you. I think he's been quite disappointing. For me, if I was a Tottenham fan, I'd be expecting a little bit more. A player that was brought in with a lot of Premier League experience up in Scotland as well. And he just hasn't really given it. But they need someone like that to sit alongside Harry Winks, who, by the way, has been incredibly impressive. And I'm looking forward to seeing him representing England in the summer as well.
Wanyama's been unlucky with a couple of injuries.
Yeah, he has.
Affected the sort of regular game time he's had.
Yeah, and he was expected to go in this summer. We were expecting Oliver Skipp to go out on loan this January. At the moment, that would be looking unlikely, wouldn't it? OK, we're going to leave the Premier League for just a moment, and Emma's going back to the Sky Pad.
On the walks again?
Yes, I am. So let's leave the Premier League for a couple of minutes and take a little look at a couple of Championship clubs now and what they might need in January. Hull City, let's start with them. They've already done a bit of business. They've brought in Herbie Kane on loan from Liverpool. They remain on the hunt, though, for a new attacking threat, but the clock is ticking, isn't it? And Grant McCann said he wanted his #1 target, which is widely thought to be Malik Wilks from Barnsley, tied up by now, or he would move on. Well, Jared Bowen has been one of the most consistent players in the Championship over the past few years, and he's having another prolific campaign, isn't he? So can he step up to the Premier League, or can they keep hold of him? That is what Hull City fans, of course, will want to know. Let's move on. And just obviously over a week into the window now, and there has been no movement at Nottingham Forest. They've been linked with no end of players, mostly strikers. So that gives you a little idea of where they need to strengthen this month. Up front, and adding attacking creativity in the form of a winger will be the priority. Eddie Nketiah is a name linked with a move. He is in talks over a loan move to the club. Sabri Lamouchi has said he is simply waiting for his phone to ring.
Yeah, well, we're going to be going to Eddie Nketiah, Emma, in just a moment. And Mark, though, Jared Bowen, who Emma talked about there, you know a lot about him, and it's no wonder that he's in demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Any striker, any player in the Championship that's getting, significant numbers of goals is always going to be of interest to sides in the Premier League. And Jarrod Bowen is very much that case. I remember watching him at Barnsley and thinking, yeah, there's a player there. He's got some ability, he's quality. And over the course of the last couple of seasons at Hull City, he's been absolutely superb. With this, without question, his best season, 17 goals in all competitions in 28 appearances, really significant numbers. I watched him actually just last week when I was on Soccer Saturday, and he didn't have his best game, but he got one chance, he finished it, and it was the match winner. And that says everything you need to know about Jarrod Bowen. He's clinical in and around the box. He's very clever with his movement. He picks up intelligent spaces, and he is so good at coming in late to the back stick and then just finding a little bit of space and finishing. And that's exactly what he did against Sheffield Wednesday. A little bit of time into the right area and clinical in front of goal. And I think that's been a really strong point of his season. And it'll be interesting as to what happens in this January window. He's getting close to the end of his contract. At the moment, Hull City hold the purse strings and they hold all the power. But I get the impression that potentially, very much so in this window, he could be a player that moves to the Premier League. And like we said earlier on, and when we talk about it later, Newcastle are one of those sides that have been looking at him.
Yeah, so many tweets have come in over the last few days about Jarrod Bowen, saying that from Premier League fans saying they want him at their club, but also a lot of tweets about Eddie Nketiah as well, JD. Now, he's come back from his loan spell at Leeds. He's clearly available for loan again. But at Arsenal, if Aubameyang or Lacazette get injured, wouldn't Nketiah at least get some game time off the bench in the Premier League?
So he should, because he is an extremely talented young man. So he should. And you know what? That word that Mark just described Jarrod Bowen as is exactly how I would describe Eddie Nketiah. He is clinical. We've seen it in the Europa League. I love it at all youth levels at England as well. He just needs game time. And unfortunately, sometimes when you're at these bigger clubs, it doesn't quite develop as you want it to in terms of games and match fitness and all the rest of it. But at the same time, at 20 years old, minutes is the most important thing to anybody's development. And he's going to need to get minutes, whether that's at Arsenal or elsewhere. Now, personally, I would turn around and say I think he's a player that could definitely play in the Premier League at this level. But it's up to him as to what he needs within his career right now. And these next 2-3 years are a critical juncture for him, especially in his development.
Did you hear my youth team story about him yesterday?
No.
Were you watching the show? You weren't watching, great.
I was away. I had to look.
But you know Joe Willock as well, right?
Huh?
So you missed my story.
Tell me, bring me.
So Eddie Nketiah, yeah, tell you. Listen.
You said you wanted an argument today, JD.
Yeah,
no,
You didn't
bring the
expect it to be with
noise.
Emma, though, did you?
So Eddie Nketiah was let go by Chelsea at under 14 level because they said, look, this guy's too small, he's not going to make it in a professional game. So the Arsenal head of the academy recruitment got Joe Willock into his office and said, Joe, have you ever heard of this guy, Eddie Nketiah? And Joe Willock said, what? He's available, he's sick, this guy, you've got to get him in on trial.
Love
so
that.
brought him in on trial, played in a game, scored, and the rest is history.
See, the thing is, just think about it as an Arsenal fan or as an Arsenal player, how emotional, how good it would feel to grow up with Joe Willock, Reece Nelson, Emil Smith-Rowe.
You spent time with some of these guys, haven't you? So.
Literally, they have such a connection both on and off the field. It would literally resonate to results. It would resonate in performances, and you could have exactly what Man United had all those years back.
Is this the class of '92?
I'm not going to say that. I'm not.
Yeah. You won't
I'm
know.
just going to say you've seen the last 3 managers have all turned around and pushed for youth so much, and they've tried to push from the academy, the under-23s. They've trusted in that system. So clearly, there's something
Arsenal
that's
used
developing
to
well.
have that with the players like Theo Walcott, Kieran Gibbs, those kind of players.
Exactly. The core needs to be people that can appreciate the club and love the club.
Yeah, in terms of those attacking options, no one said to you, there's Martinelli as well that they've got there as well. So there's a little bit of depth at Arsenal. Right, keep those hashtags coming in. It is hashtag transfer talk to have your say next. We turn our attention to Newcastle. We'll tell you exactly what Steve Bruce wants this month. Bit of transfer news has just come into us, and it involves the Bournemouth winger Jordan Ibe. Now, it had been reported elsewhere that there was some interest from Crystal Palace. However, we've been told that there have been no actual approaches for the Bournemouth winger. It's thought the club would be willing to let him leave this month because he's only got 6 months left on his contract and he hasn't played very much this season at all. He joined Bournemouth in 2016 from Liverpool. 76 appearances in that time, 3 goals for the club. He did represent England at under 21 level. OK, Mark McAdam, I know that you know that Bournemouth as a club very well. Is this any surprise to you?
No surprise. He's out of contract in the summer since joining from Liverpool, like you say. So this is entering the final phase of his deal since he went down to the South Coast. And like you say, very much restricted with appearances this season, just 2 in the Premier League, 2 in the EFL Cup. And that tells you the story, really, that he just hasn't figured. And it's quite sad because he came with so much hype. He was such a promising youngster at Liverpool, so much raw ability, but it just hasn't quite happened for him down at Bournemouth. I know Eddie Howe's worked incredibly hard with him, as have the other coaching staff, and he's a popular member of the side, but it just hasn't worked on the pitch for him. But there is still undoubtedly some quality there. I know there's been a bit of interest, and I expect things to start moving as the window progresses, but it is a sad situation, really. It seems like his time is coming to an end on the South Coast, and he hasn't quite had the impact that everyone had hoped for.
Right, Newcastle fans, it's your turn. Get in touch, #transfertalk, and Mark is about to tell you what Steve Bruce is looking for this month.
Yeah, I'm about to do an Emma Payton-style walk over to the Sky pad.
This is considerably slower, though.
Yes,
You
much
really
slower.
Walk today,
much slower. Obviously, we said before the break that we'd be wanting to hear from Newcastle and we'd be speaking about them. So Newcastle fans, make sure you get in touch and remember the #transfertalk and let us know your thoughts on what you need to do over the course of January. Throughout the window, we're making our way through all 20 Premier League sides, looking at each team and what areas they need to strengthen during the January transfer window. Next up, as we say, it's Newcastle. Steve Bruce wasted no time in stamping his mark on Newcastle, signing Joe Linton from Hoffenheim for a club record fee of £40 million last year, taking their summer spending through the £65 million mark. Initially, Bruce had said he would be reluctant to be an active player in the January window, but injuries and poor form have forced his hand. We understand they're desperate to sign a striker, a winger, and potentially a defensive midfielder. But because of their summer spending, these deals are more than likely to be loans rather than permanent signings during this window. But we know things can change very quickly. Let's have a look at who they've been looking at. As you can see, Steve Bruce has got his wish list there. We know they've been interested in Olivier Giroud, Ademola Lookman and Jared Bowen, as we said on the show. There's a few names to start thinking about, guys, because this is going to be an interesting one for Newcastle. Desperate for a striker, desperate for signings, because the season hasn't quite hit the big start that Steve Bruce wanted just yet.
Yeah, well, in that midfield area that you said there, Mark, Ashley says Conor Hourihane to Newcastle. Of course, Hourihane used to play for Sunderland, but he did play for Steve Bruce at Aston Villa as well, so she's suggesting him. Matthew says, does the panel reckon that Newcastle should chase a loan move for Gareth Bale?
Oh, wow.
The option to buy.
How many players?
After all, Gareth has experience in the Premier League and is unsettled at Real Madrid. Matthew, that would be quite a shift in Mike Ashley's transfer policy, Matthew.
That's a lot of football manager right there.
We'll keep an eye on it. James, why do they need to be busy?
Hold on, I've just got to get over that. Gareth Bale playing for Newcastle. Oh, wow. That would be left field. That would leave us running around the studio. Now, Newcastle. Now, you're probably all guessing that I love a stat. Right? And I do love a stat, but Newcastle fans might not like this. Less touches, less possession, less passes than any other team in the Premier League. They concede more shots on goal than any other team in the Premier League, and they're in the bottom 3 shots on goal themselves in the Premier League. Now, stats don't always mean the situation is dire for them, but this situation right now...
I refuse that. Don't use that word, please.
OK.
Personal connotation.
Sorry, JD Dye.
I just got it.
But those stats are no good. They're 5 points off the relegation place, and in all honesty, if they continue this way throughout the rest of the season, they really are going to be in trouble, and they're going to be looking over their shoulders for the rest of the season. They need big work. Steve Bruce needs a lot of support, and they need to start changing those stats around. And if they do, they'll creep themselves up the table.
Yeah, a few tweets coming in. Newcastle fans love to tweet us here on Good Morning Transfers. Hashtag transfer talk. Yaz says Alamola Lookman, Michy Batshuayi, Olivier Giroud and Victor Wanyama. Stu says the only position we, Newcastle, need to improve on is a striker so that we can score goals. Right. And Nick says we desperately need a goal scorer rather than a winger. So, Emma, but we know they want a striker, don't we? We know that.
Yeah, we know full well. I mean, top scorer this season, John Joe Shelby with 5 goals. Next on the list, Miguel Almiron with 2. And further down that list on 1 goal this season is their record signing, Joe Linton. Obviously brought in for £40 million this summer. We spoke about him a lot during the summer, saying, you know, is he going to hit the ground running? Unfortunately, he hasn't for Newcastle fans. But I suppose he's been brought in for the long term, a 6-year deal. But they need a goal scorer. Fans there mentioned Giroud. He's probably a bit more likely than Gareth Bale, but still maybe not so likely. He could well be on his way to Inter Milan. But I mean, he's someone the fans could get behind. He's obviously very proven in the Premier League for Arsenal and Chelsea. 4 FA Cups, Europa League winner as well, top scorer in the Europa League last season with 11 goals, and he's a World Cup winner as well. So come on, Steve Bruce.
And he can do a scorpion kick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very well indeed.
Callum says Lookman, Giroud or Piatek and Tavernier would be class. Of course, Tavernier came through the youth system at Newcastle. He's now Rangers captain. CJV says Joe Linton and Maximan were not Bruce signings. They were the chief scout. Give Bruce his own signing. So he obviously trusts Steve Bruce. Someone here saying replace Joe Linton as well. So a few there coming, but I think we can see that Newcastle fans are very clear that they want a striker, but we are clear that Newcastle do want a striker anyway. In terms of defensive midfield, I know you put that there, Mark. I'll go through a few of them. They've got Isaac Hayden, but remember that he was expected to leave in the summer. He had very good reasons for wanting to leave. It was nothing to do with the club or anything. He still stayed, so he's there, but long term, how long will he be there for? There's the 2 Longstaff brothers who are both young. There's Ki Sung-young, who's been out of favour. John Joe Shelby is, of course, a key player for them. There's Jack Colback, who we discussed at length on Monday, I think it was, and Henri Save as well, who may well come up in a few moments' time, in fact. But Ademola Lookman, we know he's been heavily linked, and there is interest from Newcastle. JD, we've already discussed that he's a winger rather than a striker.
Yep.
But you do like him as a player, don't you?
I really like him. I think he's exciting. I think he's direct. I think I hark back to that loan move that he had at RB Leipzig, where he only played about 11 games, but he scored 5 goals. He was exciting. I know it hasn't quite worked out in terms of his position right now in the Bundesliga, and he's turned around and saying that he wants to leave only 6 months into that contract. But there's no doubt in the talent whatsoever, and I have to literally go at James for this one, because I know you're talking about the statistics and you're saying, I mean, the shots on goal would be worrying for anybody, but the possession statistics wouldn't be so worrying for a Newcastle team that probably wants to be solid, especially we've seen that with Steve Bruce, defensive-minded and want to break. Now, bringing in someone like Adi Lookman would actually work. Imagine Adi Lookman on one wing, Alan Saint-Maximin on the other, and a definite goal scorer through the middle. Now, that's a counter-attacking team. So that's how I have to come back to.
You already give people nicknames.
Addy. I mean, I've got enough Nigerian friends, so I know. Like, Addy's what you call him.
You can come back a bit. It's absolutely fine. But honestly, we're talking about a goal scorer. I love Giroud, by the way. I think he's a perfect fit for Newcastle United, in my opinion. I think he will score goals, Premier League proven, as you said. But then I feel like they need some creativity. They need something there. Maybe that's the word of the window, creative midfielder, because every team seems to need it. But Newcastle, I feel, really do need just a bit of a spark, someone extra. Now, whether that means bringing Almiron inside a little bit more, if you're bringing in Lookman, maybe pushing Lookman out wide, maybe Almiron could play a bit more of a role just behind a striker. But they just need more, Newcastle, and I'm for the fans. I know you might say I'm not, but I am. I want Newcastle to be successful.
You said sorry before.
And I want Steve Bruce to be backed, because I think he's actually done a tremendous job considering the resources available to him at the moment.
I would personally put John Joe Shelby a bit further forward, but Newcastle fans are not interested in listening to a Sunderland fan on his views on where John Joe Shelby should play. Right, don't forget, the latest episode of Transfer Talk is available now on the podcast, iTunes, Spreaker, Sky Sports website, sorry. But next on Good Morning Transfers is Cenk Tosun on his way out of Everton.
Don't think much of your agility course. How am I supposed to get through those?
Morning Transfers. Now, Forgotten Men feature is back. We look at 3 players who've struggled for game time this season, and in one case, several seasons. Right, we're going to start with someone who was England's #1 towards the end of 2017, not that long ago. In his last 2 games for England, he actually kept 2 clean sheets, one of which against Brazil. Obviously, we're talking about Joe Hart, a title winner with Manchester City. He was told he was no longer first choice when Pep Guardiola took over. Loan spells at Torino and West Ham followed before he made a permanent move to Burnley. He began his time at Turf Moor as first choice, lost his place last season, never really won it back, or yet anyway. Nick Pope is #1 now, with Hart yet to play in the Premier League this season. Now, undoubtedly, he is a top goalkeeper and linked with a move this January, although Sean Dyche will be reluctant to let him go. We're going to move across one here because every transfer window sees interest in this man here, Manchester United's Marcus Rojo. He's into his 6th season at Old Trafford, but never really been a regular. Only 64 league starts in that time, but always rated highly enough by each manager to be a good enough squad player for them. With 3 league appearances this season, at the age of 29, is it time for a change? He's currently suffering from an injury, though. Right, OK. Any guesses who this player is? Transfer team. Over here.
No.
Drawing a blank.
No.
I knew that you would, and I tell you what, don't feel bad, because I think even some Newcastle fans might struggle. You'll notice that that is a very old Newcastle kit. That's because he hasn't played for them since just before Christmas 2017, a match he actually scored in away at West Ham in a 3-2 win. It is central midfielder Henri Save. I did tease that earlier on. Remember him? He signed 4 years ago, almost to the day, but has only played 5 league games for Newcastle in that time, 2 of which were off the bench. Now, I've spoken to 2 former Newcastle managers in that time who actually speak very highly of him, but it hasn't been enough to even earn him a squad number under Steve Bruce. Him and Jack Colback, who we featured on this on Monday, weren't even given a squad number. He's 29 years old, but he still has 18 months left on his contract. So let's go back to the desk. Now, it is strange, isn't it, that a player can be at a club for so long and kind of be forgotten about. He's had a couple of loan spells as well, but somebody who was highly rated at the time and told by a manager that he was, by managers, that actually he's a good player.
Yeah, it was, 2 years ago you were talking about the England appearances. That's not that long ago for an England goalkeeper, and all of a sudden he's now a forgotten man. 32 years old, vastly experienced, Premier League winner, played 19 times in the Premier League last season, but credit to Nick Pope because he's been superb keeping him out of the side. But only 1 FA Cup appearance and 1 EFL Cup appearance this season. Joe Hart, I feel, needs a move, should get a move. And there's a certain club that I think he potentially could fit a nice bill, certainly for the next 6 months, and that's Aston Villa.
And they are looking for a goalkeeper, aren't they, because of injuries. But Emma, there, Marcus Rojo, who went to second, he does still play for Manchester United, the odd game here and there, but he's never been a regular, has he?
Yeah, no, I mean, he's been injured for a long time this season as well, hasn't featured since November. 3 Premier League appearances this campaign, 5 last season, 9 the season before. He has had 11 separate injuries since he joined back in 2014. So, I mean, that just tells you the story, really. He's been linked with a move away for a long time. Fenerbahce, the latest club to be linked with him. It's also worth noting that Manchester United have 7 central defenders on their books as it is. Obviously, Harry Maguire, Victor Lindelof, the kind of preferred partnership. Chris Smalling, obviously on loan at Roma at the moment. Eric Bailly, who's been out injured for some time now, hasn't featured at all this season. He is back in training, though. Axel Twanzebe, an incredible academy graduate, he's also a little bit injured at the moment as well. Phil Jones, who is still there, one of the longest-serving players at Manchester United, and Marcus Rojo. So will he still be at the club come the end of the window? It will be interesting to see.
It's funny because when you brought up Rojo beforehand, or we saw the picture, in my head I was just thinking about, well, Man United have always had good quality kind of rotation players: John O'Shea, Wes Brown, Henningberg, like Ronnie Johnson. They've always had like 4 good depth sort of centre halves, but I mean, sometimes you do forget that Rojo has had such a long injury history.
Yeah.
It's actually good that he's actually still motivated and wants to still play in the Premier League.
Yeah, a few tweets coming in about forgotten men. Actually, Jake says at Chelsea, Baba Rahman and Victor Moses, forgotten men. I mean, they're both out on loan as well.
Moses.
Moses.
Coming here as well.
Great shout.
Yeah, someone said Reece Oxford, who of course is playing now in Germany, although he's been out of the side at the moment at Augsburg, where he is now, having previously been at Borussia Mönchengladbach. Now, it's been an impressive season so far for Sheffield United. They're 8th in their first season back in the Premier League. So will they add to their squad this month? Manager Chris Wilder admits there will be outgoings rather than incomings at Bramall Lane. Let's hear from him now.
These boys going out. Richard Stearman, Kean Bryan needs games, Leon Clark, Jake Wright, Ben Hennigan. If we receive bids from anybody, we'll always assess them and do what's right for the football club. And in that, as I've said, we've got positions that we need to strengthen. Not bringing in 4, 5 and 6 players. The group's good at the moment, it's in a good place, and it's just a tinker, and it's an important window. It's just a tinker, and hopefully we can do that in January.
Yeah, so Chris Wilder there, more on Sheffield United perhaps at transfer talk at midday. But we're going to go on to Crystal Palace now, and we know that they, like many other clubs, are looking for a striker. Mark, what do we know?
Yeah, Crystal Palace are in talks with Everton over a loan move for Cenk Tosun. Tosun is keen to get more minutes under his belt, particularly with the Euros happening in the summer. Every single player that potentially could be involved with the national side wants to play as much football as possible and ensure they are on the plane for this summer's tournament. Sky Sports News understands Tosun does not want to go back to the Turkish league. He would prefer to stay in the Premier League or play in the Bundesliga. But Crystal Palace are leading the chase for him at the moment. Palace boss Roy Hodgson says he wants a striker in January, and Tosun at the moment looks like possibly being the man.
Yeah, and James, this is another club just wanting a goal scorer.
I think every club does at the moment, but Crystal Palace, I describe them as the smooth operators of the January transfer window. Yeah. Last year, Michy Batshuayi came in.
Michael Bridge would not tell you that was smooth.
Yes,
he would be fuming as well that you're singing on.
He'll be singing along to it, though, wouldn't he?
He'll tell you for the 600th time he was where till 1 a.m.
I'm sure he's dancing at home when Michy Batshuayi was announced. But he scored 5 goals in 11 games. Great signing. 2 years previous to that, Crystal Palace went into at the end of January. They were sitting in the relegation zone, signed Patrick Van Arnholt, Jeffrey Schlupp, Luka
Milivojevic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Get that one
Takes
wrong.
a long time.
And Mamadou Sakho on loan from Liverpool. They ended up finishing the season in 14th place. So
yeah, that was under Sam Allardyce, that wasn't it? But in Crystal Palace, JD, they are going well, and it does seem that. Because remember, in the summer we were talking about they need a striker and a right back, and it seems like that's still the case.
Honestly, I've been going to Roy Hodgson's press conferences, which is an absolute pleasure, by the way, for about a year now, and he's been talking about needing that striker. I just really, really hope he gets the support that's needed, because he does such a good job there defensively, and if he could get something going forward the other way, Crystal Palace could be a real force.
Just to say, only Watford have scored less goals than Crystal Palace this season.
That shows the credit that Roy Hodgson's done.
Good late stat there, Emma. OK, right, thanks to all of you, JD. James, great debut. And
well done,
Emma, podcast available now, Spreaker and the Sky Sports News website, and, of course, iTunes as well. We are back for Good Morning Transfers in the morning, all right? But you don't have to wait that long to see us again, because Transfer Talk returns in just a couple of hours from midday, and then the transfer show is tonight, 7 p.m, as usual, with Darmasheth and Carve Song. On the way next on Sky Sports News, there's EFL Cup reaction on the Match Centre with Danny Higginbotham, and they were looking ahead to the Premier League fixtures as well.